It's time to take a look at fuel surcharge and what it means to you. I'll explain more about that right after this.
Everybody get up.
Hey everybody, it's me, Mark State, back here talking with you. Welcome, come into the night with me. It's a little bit after midnight, and this week's video is actually going to be a series of videos. The fuel surcharge, I've shot this video 4 or 5 times now, and it's just such a big topic. I've decided to break it down into 2 or 3 videos, so we can keep the videos short, and you can take them and watch them in chunks at your own leisure. I promise you this: by the time you're done, you're going to know everything you need to know about fuel surcharge. And I'm also going to prove my point from last week's video, which was Prime is not paying 100% of the fuel surcharge. So that's where we're at. That's where we're going to go. Okay, so let's go ahead and wrap this thing up for video 1 here, which is the history of the fuel surcharge, how it's computed, and why it's important for you. Okay, so if you already know all about the fuel surcharge, you may want to skip this video and go on to video number 2. So let's dig into it. Fuel surcharge. What is it? Why is it? Why do we have it? Where did it start? What's the history on the fuel surcharge? Okay, fuel surcharge, a little bit of history, a little bit of background before we get into all the nuts and bolts of it. Back during President Nixon's era, before deregulation in the trucking industry, the ICC pretty much ran things, you know, as from a government agency, the Interstate Commerce Commission, the ICC. They regulated freight rates, lanes, what carriers could run where. That's pretty much why everybody wanted to do away with it. Well, one of the main components back in 1973 and 74 was this country's first major energy crisis that we had. And diesel fuel was the big impact. And what was happening during that shortage of diesel was a lot of the mom and pop trucking companies, the independent business owners, were going out of business because diesel fuel was rising so quickly. The price was going up so fast, it was putting them out of business, because they just, back then, before deregulation, they couldn't just simply hike their freight rate to cover the increase in fuel cost. That had to be, you had to go through a process with the ICC. You had to apply to change your prices. And a lot of mom and pop trucking companies went out of business because the ICC couldn't respond fast enough to those requests. So President Nixon said, hey, we got to do something to help the American trucker, the trucking industry. And that was basically the birth of the fuel surcharge program. Now, back then it had its own iteration of it, and it was still bureaucratic and red tape because the ICC was just dragging their feet. It took until the second energy crisis, 6 years later in 1979, under President Jimmy Carter, for the ICC to finally come up with a formula that makes the shippers and the receivers happy, the customers, made the carriers happy, and made the independent contractor, the owner-operators happy. And that's the formula that we've lived with up until today, which is the average diesel price minus the driver protection point gives a result divided by 6.0 miles per gallon, and that's the fuel surcharge. It's a really simple program, and that was codified and pretty much put into place in 1981. I believe it was June or July of 81 when deregulation happened. So that program's been in place, again, essentially since 1981. During, when deregulation happened, and that's the formula we've used as an industry. The purpose of the fuel surcharge program was to, and let me see if I can, don't hold me to this quote, I'm just trying to go from memory here at 1 o'clock in the morning. The purpose of the fuel surcharge program is to offset and or defray the cost of fuel to the entity responsible for purchasing the fuel. I think that's right. It sounds right. Yeah, offset, defray the cost of the fuel for the entity responsible for purchasing the fuel. So think about that. Okay, it's not specifying who the entity is. It's just which entity is responsible for purchasing the fuel for that particular load. In today's case, as a lease operator signed on with a carrier, I'm responsible for the cost of the fuel. I pay all the fuel on this truck that goes into the truck as well as what goes into the trailer. So that's the basic premise. And the goal, the spirit of that fuel surcharge program, again, to help offset or defray the cost of fuel. Let's take a hypothetical 1,200 mile trip and see how this plays out. Okay, we got a 1,200 mile trip, and we know we're going to be able to collect fuel surcharge on this. So let's take a look at the three main components of the fuel surcharge. Number one is the average price of diesel. We'll get into that, how that's figured. Two, driver or price protection point is the second element of the fuel surcharge program. And the third element that impacts greatly, miles per gallon, average miles per gallon. Those are the three items. Let's take the first one, the average price of diesel fuel. How is that calculated? Well, the Department of Energy each week puts out the fuel price index. Public publication every Tuesday. Every shipper, receiver, customer, transportation company, carrier, broker, everybody looks at that on Tuesday when the Department of Energy puts out the fuel price index. Let's take a hypothetical week. Pen and paper handy, write this number down because this is going to come into the future videos. Let's use the week of April 27th, 2015. The average price of fuel was $2.81 and 1/10, so 2.811 cents per gallon was the average price of fuel nationwide, from Bangor, Maine to San Diego, from Miami to Seattle. You take all the different fuel vendors out there selling diesel and come up with what's the average price. April 27th, the average price was $2.81 a gallon. There's part one of our equation. Okay, part two, the driver or the price protection point. Why that's important to have that in as part of the ICC's equation. That is the dollar amount that the entity responsible for purchasing the fuel will have a maximum dollar amount that they'll pay for. Okay? As an example, here at Prime, as a lease operator, that dollar amount is $1.25 per gallon. Okay? So, of the total of that $2.81 average price, I'm responsible for no more than $1.25 of the $2.81. The rest of this is the customer's responsibility. That's where the fuel surcharge comes in. So if the price of fuel goes sky high, $8 a gallon, I'm still down here as a driver, the entity paying for the fuel. I'm only responsible for $1.25. The customer, the cost of that fuel, up to, whatever, the sky's the limit, is passed on to the customer. Now the inverse is true as well. As the price of diesel drops and comes down to $1.25, now all of a sudden my fuel surcharge, the customer has no responsibility. It's all on me. Okay, that makes sense? So we know the price of fuel changes every week, and this number goes up and down, so the customer's responsibility changes. That way, the customer's not overcharged one week or undercharged the next week, because it's pegged, the price of the surcharge is pegged to the Department of Energy's fuel price index. Make sense? Okay, $1.25 protection point. Third part of the equation, average miles per gallon. You take all the trucks, no matter who's operating them, and get their average miles per gallon, and you're going to come up with, or what you're going to find statistically, is that it's 6 miles to the gallon. Okay? Now, granted, you're probably getting a lot better than that. Some are getting worse, and that's why we have that 6.0 average MPG. So if we put the whole formula together, Department of Energy's fuel price index, the average price of fuel on Tuesday, okay, minus the $1.25 protection point gives you a result. You take that result, divide by 6 miles to the gallon, and you come out with fuel surcharge for the week. Now let's go back to the Department of Energy's April 27th, 2015 number. Remember that? $2.81 a gallon minus the $1.25 equals, now let's divide that by 6.0, 6 miles per gallon. What do we come up with? 26 cents fuel surcharge. 26 cents per mile fuel surcharge. Okay, we're going to wrap this first section up with a little bit of homework for you. You get to do some homework. Okay, ready? I want you to play with this formula again on a hypothetical 1,200 mile trip. Industry standard formula, 26 cents a mile. What's the total revenue based on a 1,200 mile trip? How much can you expect? Figure that out for me. The other part of the homework, I want you to figure that, what if this fuel price index was $2.40 a gallon? What's the fuel surcharge at the end of that computation? Okay? Again, based on a 1,200 mile trip. So we've got the industry standard formula and fuel surcharge, and I want you to change this 281, I want you to change that to a couple different numbers. Most importantly, $2.40 a gallon average price for diesel. The rest of the formula stays the same, still the same 1,200 miles. How much total revenue do you gain? Make sense? There's your homework. That's the end of part 1. Tomorrow, part 2 of fuel surcharge. We'll get into it then. I'll see you tomorrow.